Ladies and gentlemen, if you've come here to learn about alternative minimum tax, AMT, you've come to the right place. I've gotten numerous, and I mean numerous requests to this video, and I think part of it is that you guys just wanted to torture me to see if I would actually make this video, because putting this information together seriously hurt my brain. All right guys, well I have a handout for you that's free to download. You're gonna find it in the description section of this video, so make sure to download it for yourself, because there is no way you're gonna remember everything I'm talking about in this video, so that's why there's a free Word document handout you can download for free. Let's begin. Let's start off by talking about what AMT actually is. Alternative minimum tax, known as AMT, is the minimum amount of tax one pays after certain adjustments and preferences are taken into consideration. If you have no idea what preferences or adjustments mean, don't worry. We're gonna get to that in just a moment. To visually help you understand what AMT is, think of it this way. Think of two tax calculations taking place at the same time. The first way is we do a calculation of your tax calculated under the normal regular tax rules. So you have your taxable income and your taxes being calculated under that method. Then, now visually think of another calculation happening over here that under a different set of rules. This is the alternative minimum tax rules. So some of the tax deductions you could take over here, under AMT, they say, you can't take them. So you have to add things back, which is known as adjustments and preferences. So once you run through the regular tax calculation, and then once you run through the AMT calculation, you get your final tax number. So you have your regular tax number here, and then you have your AMT, your alternative minimum tax number here. And you get the privilege of paying whichever one is higher. So if your alternative minimum tax is higher, this is the total amount of tax you get to pay. So since this is the new higher tax amount, this becomes your new minimum tax, which is known as AMT. Let's continue. Now the difference between the higher AMT tax amount and the regular tax calculated under regular tax rules, the difference between the two is known as AMT. Now let's say your AMT tax is $1,100. The difference between the two, the $1,100 and $1,000, is obviously $100. Since AMT is higher, we're going to have to report that difference on Form 1040, line 45. So as you can see here, $100 will be reported on line 45. I know this is an overly simplified example, but that's essentially how it works. The higher tax amount becomes your new minimum tax, which is why they call it alternative minimum tax, or as I like to call it,
more tax.
So how complicated is AMT? That's a question I get a lot. Well, let me put it this way. If you truly wanted to torture somebody, there aren't much better ways than to make somebody sit their butt down and watch a slideshow presentation on alternative minimum tax. And the reason I mention that, guys, is because it's so complicated. Don't feel bad if you don't get all this the first time. If you want to really understand it, you need to walk through the actual tax forms, study it line by line, read stuff like the materials on them provide to you, read publications to really get a good grasp on it. So don't feel bad if you do not understand it the first time through, because it is one of the most complex subjects around. So why does AMT even exist? Well, I looked into this, and from what I could find online is that it was really enacted back in 1969. So the reason this came into play is there was a small group of wealthy individuals, let's say. I think they say it was around 155 people or so. You can look this information up for yourself. I'll include links in the description section of the video. And these 100 people, now in today's dollars, they were high income earners. They were earning about $1 million a year in today's money. But what happened is, because they had all these different adjustments like itemized deductions and other credits and so on and so forth, they were able to completely wipe out their tax, and they paid no income tax on basically $1 million a year income. Well, as you can imagine, that makes a lot of people upset. They're like, how do they make $1 million a year but not pay any tax? So the Treasury Department came up with this new alternative minimum tax that would target these wealthy individuals. And so what's happened though is initially it did affect these wealthy taxpayers, and they had to add back things like deductions and itemized deductions and so on and so forth that they would normally deduct, thus causing them to pay tax. However, what I learned is that this whole AMT thing, the exemption amounts and whatnot, weren't really indexed for inflation. So now the bulk of the people who pay the AMT tax right now in America are actually the middle class, or at least a huge percentage of them are. So where is alternative minimum tax actually reported? AMT is reported on Form 6251, and the final amount of AMT tax to report is currently reported on 1040, page 2, line 45, but that's subject to change once these new 2018 tax forms are released, so that might change a little bit, so just keep that in mind for these upcoming tax years going forward. So you might be wondering if I have a full-scale calculation example of how to calculate alternative minimum tax in this video, and I absolutely do not, and let me explain why. Because if you actually look at Form 6251, and then you go to look at the instructions for Form 6251, you will find it's about a 70-step. I'm not effing kidding. It's a 70-step calculation, and that is why I'm not showing a full-scale calculation in this video, because you guys would be dead by the end of it, including myself, and that's no good for anybody. Maybe someday I'll make it in another video, but really, use tax software. This is why I recommend people use tax software, just because it's so calculation focused, so calculation intensive. If you do it by hand, you are highly likely to make mistakes. So if you find yourself if you're a high income earner, 100,000, 200,000 and up, I really suggest using tax software to help you prepare your taxes, or going to somebody who's a tax professional who can help you, because there's so much room for error in a 70-step calculation. So who is most likely in 2018 to be paying alternative minimum tax? Generally, households with incomes ranging between $200,000 up to $1 million. This doesn't mean you can't pay AMT if you make less than $200,000. It just means you are less likely to. Other people who might fall prey to AMT are taxpayers who normally itemize versus take the standard deduction, taxpayers who live in high income tax states such as California, New York, and states like that. Other taxpayers who might be affected are those who used to have a lot of personal exemptions. As you guys know, personal exemptions are going away starting in January 1st of 2018 when we go to file our taxes next year. So I don't really think that will play as much of a role into calculating AMT as it used to. Because under AMT rules, you pretty much have to add back some or all of your personal exemptions. But since they're not going to be there, I don't think it's going to hurt you one way or the other going forward. Now you're probably wondering, Mike, what are some things I can do to make sure I have the least likelihood or chance of paying AMT? Well, here's a few things you can do. The first thing you can do is lower your adjusted gross income. So contribute to your 401k, health savings accounts, traditional IRA accounts, etc. Avoid states with high income taxes. So basically, if this were advice to myself, I would be saying, Mike, move the heck out of California.
Get me! Oh God! Horse! Horse! Please! Help me! Please! Please! Oh my God!
If you feel like charitable giving, it might be the time, because the more donations you have, the more charitable contributions you have, and if you can itemize, that will help you reduce the likelihood of you paying alternative minimum tax. Carefully time your long-term capital gain sales. These can bump up your income and make you more subject to AMT. So there's actually normal tax rates or regular tax rates for capital gains. There's also AMT rates for long-term capital gains as well, if you're subject to AMT. So you have to take that into consideration. So if you have a bunch of stock sales you want to make, you might spread those out over 1 year to the next so that you don't bump up your income too high and get yourself in trouble eventually paying alternative minimum tax. So now, what's the easiest way if you can find out if you're gonna have to pay this whole AMT thing or not? Now let's talk briefly just on some of the AMT preferences and adjustments. The first one I want to mention is the standard deduction. It's not available for AMT purposes. No deduction for AMT. The next one is personal exemptions. As I mentioned earlier, personal exemptions are not available for AMT purposes. No deduction allowed. Mortgage interest used to acquire or improve a residence is still deductible under alternative minimum tax rules. However, a second mortgage, home equity interest, and interest on any portion of a refinance that exceeds the balance of the refinance mortgage is not deductible under alternative minimum tax rules. Medical and dental expenses, only the amount over 10% of your adjusted gross income is deductible for AMT purposes. Passive activities, When we think of passive activities, we generally think of rental real estate or other passive business interests. Passive losses are limited to passive income. Now, under AMT rules, passive gains and losses must be taken into account under the alternative minimum tax rules, which is why there is a Form 8582 for AMT purposes. So even your passive income and losses can get thrown back into AMT under that calculation and that set of rules. Another preference and adjustment is tax refunds. Tax refunds, including property tax refunds, are not included in income for AMT. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. You do not want to include it in your alternative minimum tax. And I didn't say it earlier, but there is an alternative minimum tax, right? Because that's a different set of tax rules, which also means there's an alternative minimum taxable income. So just keep that in mind. There's a regular taxable income under the regular tax rules, and there's an alternative minimum tax income. And so that's the calculation I was talking about earlier in the video. And the last preference and adjustment item I'll mention here is taxes. There are no state and local tax, real estate, or any other type of tax deductible under AMT that I am aware of. There are at least 11 more of these preferences / adjustment items that I'm not listing here. So if you want a complete comprehensive list of AMT preferences and adjustments, visit the amtadvisor.com or follow this link in the handout, and that will take you to this guy's website. This should indicate how complicated this is, that a person invented an entire website just for this one single tax topic. That's how complicated and broad AMT actually is. Now, are net operating loss deductions allowed under alternative minimum tax? The answer is yes. However, the NOL has its own separate rule for AMT. So it's based on your alternative minimum tax net operating loss amount, not the net operating loss amount under your regular tax rules. The amount of the NOL is going to be subject to the AMT rules and not the regular tax rules. What about the treatment of capital gains and dividends? So for the most part, under AMT, it's pretty much treated the same as under regular tax rules. There's some exceptions, which I do not want to go into in this video, but just keep that in mind. Now, there are some exemptions for AMT that I'm going to put up on screen here. I'm not going to read through this for you guys. You can find this information in the handout, or you can pause the video on the screen. I'll put all this information up there for you. Just feel free to pause the video and read it to your own liking, or like I said, just read it on the handout. What I want you guys to know about these AMT exemptions is that there's 3 different kinds of exemptions. The first exemption will allow you to fully avoid AMT. The next exemption is a partial one, so that you can avoid some of the alternative minimum tax. And the third one is basically saying you're way too rich, your income's too high, and you're fully disallowed the exemption under AMT. I'm gonna place these exemptions on screen for you guys now, just for a few seconds. Pause the video if you wanna look at it, otherwise we're gonna move on. Now, a question you might have is, alternative minimum tax rates, do they differ from regular tax rates? And the answer is yes. AMT has tax rates of 26% on amounts up to $186,300 or $93,150 if married filing separate. But it can get even higher. It has a tax rate of 28% if your income is above $186,000 or $93,150 if you file married filing separate. The next concept you might hear in conjunction with AMT is tentative minimum tax. And you're like, what is that? All right, guys, so tentative minimum tax is this. You take your alternative taxable income times your AMT tax rate is going to equal your tentative minimum tax. The basic formula to calculate alternative minimum tax, I'll show you guys on screen here, is your tentative minimum tax minus regular taxable income plus tax on lump sum distributions plus foreign tax credits equals AMT amount reported on line 45 of Form 1040. All right, guys, that was a quick overview of what AMT is, why AMT came to existence, basic instructions of how it works, where to report it, kind of some of the basic calculation examples, where to learn more to find out if you're going to be subject to AMT, and so on and so forth. I realize, guys, this stuff is extremely complicated, so you can imagine how hard it is for me to try to pull this together in a way that makes sense. So I really hope it did make sense. The handout, if you look at it visually on screen, if you read the handout I put together for you guys, I'm also including a bunch of links to take you to other articles and websites to help you learn more about alternative minimum tax if you would like to, so be sure to check that out. So hopefully with all those tools and resources, I hope it makes sense for you guys, but feel free to ask questions if you have any. I understand that you're probably gonna have some. It's a very, very complicated tax topic, but like I said, the best way to learn this stuff is to actually look at the forms, look at form 6251, look at the instructions to 6251 and read up on it. And you can start to understand more about the adjustments and preferences that go into this thing. And I really am impressed, I'll tell you guys, with the AMTadvisor.com. He offers, or he or she, whomever, offers fantastic information on that website, so be sure to check it out. I really highly recommend it if you want to learn more. Even though I got a couple headaches from putting this information together, because it's, you know, brain numbing or mind damaging types of things, it's still fun to learn. I learned a few more things about AMT that I didn't know about, and it's fun to share this information with you guys. So if you liked the video, be sure to drop a like before you leave. Share this information with a friend, especially if you know somebody who might be subject to alternative minimum tax. I'm sure they would like to know how this stuff works and how they can avoid some of the pitfalls to help them entirely avoid AMT if possible. And be sure to subscribe if not already, because here on Money and Life TV, every single week we produce new videos to help you become fiscally fit as we teach finances, investing, and taxes on this channel on a regular basis. So be sure to subscribe, guys. Well, until then, I will see you guys down in the comment section down below. Looking forward to reading your comments and seeing what you guys have to say. Or if you have any questions, I'll be sure to see you there. So make sure to drop a comment before you leave. I love you guys so much. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Now remember, take this information and use it to live your life uncaged. Have a great week, everybody. Peace.